One bullet, one locked room, one perfect suicide that was never meant to be questioned until Poirot arrived. Grab your tea, settle in, and let's begin. If you're ready for the twist, drop your city in the comments and hit subscribe. Here we go. Chapter 1. The body in the locked library. Rain hammered against the tall windows of Alderley Court like impatient fingers drumming on glass. It was just past midnight on the 22nd of October, 1937, when the scream ripped through the old manor house. Servants spilled from their quarters, guests stumbled half-dressed from bedrooms, and everyone rushed toward the heavy oak door of the library. It was locked from the inside. 2 footmen threw their shoulders against it until the ancient lock snapped. And there on the Persian rug lay Sir Reginald Haverford, baronet millionaire and host of the weekend party, with a neat bullet hole in his right temple and an old service revolver still warm in his slack hand by the time the local constable arrived. 20 minutes later, the scene looked perfect for a tragic suicide. A note in Sir Reginald's own handwriting lay beside the blotter. "I can no longer live with what I have done. Forgive me." The French windows were bolted, the only door had been locked, and the key was still in the lock on the inside. No footprints marred the soaked gravel beneath the windows. The village doctor signed the certificate without hesitation. Case closed before it ever opened, except one small Belgian guest with brilliant green eyes and a mustache waxed to perfection stood quietly in the corner, watching everything. Hercule Poirot had accepted the invitation only as a courtesy to an old friend, yet now those little gray cells were already humming. Something about the angle of the wound bothered him. Something about the position of the revolver felt wrong. And the smell. Yes, there was a faint trace of something beneath the sharp bite of gunpowder. Almonds, bitter almonds, while the family gathered in the drawing room, weeping and whispering about scandal and shame. Poirot slipped back into the library. Alone. He knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb anything, and studied the dead man's face. Sir Reginald had been 62 years old, wealthy, handsome, in a cruel way, and famous for 3 things: his priceless collection of rare books, his vicious temper, and the string of broken young men and women he left behind him, like discarded gloves. Poirot lifted the suicide note with a silk handkerchief. The ink was still slightly damp at the edges. Curious, he sniffed it delicately. Then he turned his attention to the revolver. It was an old Webley mark, for the kind issued 2 officers in the Great War. The serial number had been filed away long ago. Interesting. Very interesting. Upstairs, the house guests were being gently questioned by the inspector from Scotland Yard, who had arrived once the local police realized the dead man was too important to bury quietly. There was Lady Haverford, pale and dried in black silk, though her husband had died only hours earlier. There was her stepson Charles, handsome and furious, already talking about inheritance. There was Miss Diana Cleek, the beautiful young secretary, whose lipstick was smeared and whose eyes were red. There was Captain Marcus Blaine, the old army friend who kept staring at the floor. And there was Mrs. Vanessa Rice, the elegant widow who had arrived that very afternoon with a suitcase full of secrets and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Poirot listened from the hallway as each gave the same story. Dinner at 8:30 a. Blazing row between Sir Reginald and his stepson bridge until 11. Then everyone went to bed. The shot was heard at 5 minutes past 12. No one saw anything. No one heard anything until the shot. But Poirot knew someone was lying, because when he examined the grandfather clock in the hall, he noticed it had stopped at exactly 11:58, and the library clock showed 12:15. Someone had tampered with time itself. He returned to the library one last time before dawn. Kneeling again, he ran his fingers along the edge of the massive desk. There, hidden beneath a leather-bound first edition of Shakespeare, he found it. A tiny thread of pale blue silk caught on a splinter. The same pale blue as the dressing gown Mrs. Vanessa Rice had worn when she came downstairs after the shot. And on the windowsill, almost invisible against the dark wood, a single smear of fresh mud. Mud that had no business being inside a locked room on a rainy night, as the first gray light of morning crept over the wet lawns. Poirot allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Somewhere in this house, a murderer was already packing to leave, believing the perfect crime had been committed. They had arranged everything: the locked door, the note, the gun placed so carefully in a dead man's hand. They had even counted on the laziness of country police and the eagerness of a grieving family to avoid scandal. They had not counted on Hercule Poirot. The little Belgian closed the library door softly behind him and walked toward the breakfast room where the suspects waited, pale and sleepless. The hunt had only just begun, to be continued. Chapter 2: The Five Who Wanted Him Dead. Poirot entered the morning room at 9 sharp, clicking the door shut behind him like the start of a play. 5 faces turned, 5 masks. He greeted them with his usual polite bow, then took the small chair by the fire, as though it were the most natural thing in the world for a Belgian detective to take charge of an English country house the morning after a death. "Let us be clear, Ms. Amos," he began in his soft, precise voice. "Sir Reginald Haverford did not kill himself. He was murdered. Someone in this room knows exactly how it was done." A collective gasp. Lady Haverford pressed a lace handkerchief to dry lips. Young Charles half rose from his seat, face red with fury. Only Mrs. Vanessa Rice remained perfectly still, her pale blue dressing gown now replaced by severe black her eyes bright with something that might have been amusement. Poirot raised one small hand and silence fell. "We have 5 people who hated Sir Reginald enough to kill him," he continued. "Let us meet them properly. First, Lady Haverford. Married for money 20 years earlier, she had endured public affairs and private cruelty. Last week, Sir Reginald told friends he planned to divorce her and leave her penniless. She gains freedom and the jointure that divorce would have destroyed. Second, Charles Haverford, the stepson, 28 years old and drowning in gambling debts. His allowance was cut off 6 months ago. Yesterday afternoon, Sir Reginald threatened to change his will and cut Charles out completely. Charles was heard shouting, 'I could kill you for this,' before storming from the library at 7 o'clock. Third, Miss Diana Cleek, the secretary, 24, beautiful and clever. For 2 years, she had been more than a secretary. 3 days ago, Sir Reginald ended the affair with a check and a laugh. She tore the check to pieces in front of the servants. Last night, she was seen crying in the garden, long after everyone else had gone to bed. Fourth, Captain Marcus Blaine, the oldest friend. They served together in France. After the war, Blaine lost everything to drink and bad investments. Sir Reginald kept him on a leash of loans and insults. Yesterday, Blaine asked for £5,000 to save himself from ruin. Sir Reginald refused and called him a parasite to his face. Fifth, Mrs. Vanessa Rice, the surprise guest. Elegant, mysterious, and newly arrived from Cairo with letters of introduction that somehow never quite arrived. Nobody knows why she was invited, yet she was the last person seen leaving the library at 11:45. Carrying a book, she never returned. Poirot paused, letting the words settle like dust. Each of you had reason. Each of you had opportunity. The house was quiet after 11:30. Servants were in their wing. Guests were supposedly in bed. Yet someone walked along the corridor, turned the key in the library door from the inside after the shot, and walked out again, leaving no trace. Charles laughed bitterly. How? The door was locked, the key inside the windows bolted from within. Even Houdini could not manage that trick. Poirot smiled the smile of a cat who has seen the canary. Precisely, mon ami. That is what makes this crime so brilliant and so stupid at the same time. The murderer wished us to see an impossible crime. They did not expect Hercule Poirot to see the one thing that makes it possible. He stood and walked to the window, watching rain slide down the glass. Now we play a little game. I will ask each of you to write for me on this paper the exact time you went to bed last night. A simple thing. Yet one of you will make a mistake. He laid 5 sheets of crested notepaper and 5 fountain pens on the table. The silence grew, thick enough to touch. Lady Haverford wrote first, her hand steady. 11:50. Charles scrawled 12:15 with angry strokes. Diana hesitated, then wrote 12 sharp. Blaine put 11:40. Vanessa Rice wrote with calm elegance, 11:55. Poirot gathered the pages, studied them a moment, then slipped them into his pocket. Excellent. Now we know who is lying. He turned back to the room, eyes shining because the clock in the hall stopped at 11:58. Someone moved it forward later to confuse the time of death. 2 of you have written times that fit perfectly with the real murder between 11:45 and 11:58. The others have been clever and chosen later times. But clever is not the same as truthful. Lady Haverford rose suddenly. I will not stay here to be insulted by a foreign policeman. Poirot bowed. Madame, you are of course free to leave. But the local constable is at the door and Scotland Yard arrives within the hour. Running looks bad on a woman wearing black for a husband she did not love. She sat down again very slowly. Good, said Poirot, rubbing his hands together. Now we are all comfortable. Let us talk about mud on a clean floor and a thread of pale blue silk, and why a man who shoots himself in the right temple drops the gun into his left hand. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 10. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside the morning room, 5 people stared at the little Belgian, who had just turned their perfect murder into a trap. And Poirot smiled again, because the best part of any investigation is watching the rats realize the cheese was wired to a bomb. Chapter 3. The thread and the almonds. Poirot asked everyone to remain seated, then walked to the door and opened it. The butler Hastings stood there, pale but composed, carrying a silver tray with fresh coffee. Poirot took the tray himself, dismissed the man with a nod, and closed the door again. He set the tray on a side table, poured 1 cup, and only one, then carried it across the room to Mrs. Vanessa Rice. A little coffee, madame. It is hot and strong. You look as if you need it. Vanessa accepted the cup with a small smile. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. Poirot watched the fingers. Perfect nails, pale pink polish, not a tremor. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You are very observant. Observation is my profession, he replied softly. And I observe that you wear no jewelry this morning except a tiny sapphire brooch pinned inside the collar of your dress. Yesterday you wore pearls. Pearls that are now missing 1 small thread of silk, the color of your dressing gown caught on the corner of Sir Reginald's desk. Last night, silk tears easily, does it not? Vanessa lifted the cup to her lips and drank without haste. Pearls break all the time, monsieur. Servants sweep them up and say nothing. Perhaps, said Poirot, but silk does not lie, and neither does cyanide. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and produced a small glass vial. Inside floated a few crystals that caught the gray light. The faint smell of bitter almonds in the library was not imagination. These crystals were dissolved in Sir Reginald's whiskey decanter. Enough to kill a horse, yet he was shot instead. Curious, someone prepared 2 deaths and used only 1. Captain Blaine shifted heavily in his chair. His voice came out rough. You're saying the poor devil was poisoned and shot. I am saying someone wished us to believe suicide by bullet because poison takes time and leaves traces. The bullet was insurance. A very English kind of insurance. Poirot turned to the fireplace and picked up the poker. He stirred the ashes gently, then lifted something. Out, a tiny twist of burnt paper, no larger than a fingernail. This was in the grate. The corner of a letter. The paper is handmade from Egypt. The watermark is a scarab beetle. Mrs. Rice arrived from Cairo 3 days ago. How many people in this house write letters on Egyptian paper? Vanessa set her cup down with a soft click. You are building a pretty tower of cards, monsieur, but cards fall. They do, replied Poirot, when the wind blows. And the wind is blowing now. He replaced the poker and faced the room again. Let us reconstruct the night. At 11:45, Mrs. Rice leaves the library carrying a book. At 11:50, the hall clock is stopped deliberately. At 11:55, someone enters the library again, this time with a revolver and a glass of drugged whiskey. Sir Reginald drinks. He becomes drowsy. The murderer places the revolver in his hand, pulls the trigger, then locks the door from the inside with a simple trick I will demonstrate later. The key is left in the lock, the note already forged is placed on the desk, and the killer departs through the French. Windows closing, but not bolting them from outside. Using a thread pulled tight. Clever. Almost perfect. Charles Haverford laughed. Too loudly, almost perfect. You just described an acrobat with ice water in his veins. No, mon ami, said Poirot quietly. Only someone who rehearsed many times. Someone who knew Sir Reginald always took one whiskey before bed. Someone who knew the servants. We're in the far wing and the dogs were locked up because of the storm. Someone who walked across wet gravel in bedroom slippers and left one speck of mud on the library sill. He reached into his pocket again and produced a small envelope. From it, he shook a single grain of gravel and one pale flake of dried mud onto his palm and held it out for them to see. Bedroom slippers lined with lamb's wool, madame, pale blue to match the dressing gown. The left slipper has a thin sole and a tiny hole near the toe. Mud seeps through. Wool holds it. You did not notice when you changed into shoes this morning. Vanessa looked at the mud, then at Poirot. For the first time the mask slipped, and something cold and dangerous flickered behind her eyes. You are guessing, she said. No, madame. Hercule Poirot does not guess. He knows. He turned to the others. The rest of you provided the noise and confusion. Angry. Words during dinner, tears in the garden, shouting about money. All very helpful to keep attention away from the quiet woman borrowing a book late at night. Lady Haverford spoke for the first time, her voice thin and sharp. Why would Vanessa kill my husband? She barely knew him. Poirot tilted his head. Did she? Not? Then why did Sir Reginald receive a telegram from Cairo 2 weeks ago signed VR that made him smile for the first time in months? Why did he tell his solicitor the past was catching up and must be paid to go away again? Vanessa stood up slowly. Enough games. If you have proof, arrest me. Otherwise, I am going to my room. Poirot bowed. Of course, madame, but first one tiny experiment. He crossed to the door, opened it, and spoke to the constable waiting outside. A moment later, the man returned, carrying the pale blue dressing gown folded neatly over his arm. Poirot took it, turned it inside out, and held it up. On the left slipper pocket, a dark stain showed clearly against the light wool. Fresh mud, said Poirot, from last night's gravel. And here he touched the hem, a single pearl caught in the stitching. Your missing pearl, madame. It dropped when you stepped over the window, and the thread pulled tight. Vanessa stared at the gown. The room was utterly silent, except for the rain. Then she laughed once, short and bitter. You really are the little man they say you are. Yes, I killed him. He destroyed. My brother in Egypt 20 years ago drove him to suicide, left my family with nothing. I waited a very long time. She sat down again, suddenly calm. The poison was for him to drink slowly while he read the letter I brought, the true story of what he did. The gun was in case he refused. He refused. Poirot looked almost sad. And the locked room, string ice, and an old stage trick from the music halls. Childishly simple when you know how. She shrugged. I did not expect Hercule Poirot to be a guest. That was unlucky. Captain Blaine exhaled a long breath. Charles stared at the carpet. Diana began to cry quietly. Lady Haverford simply closed her eyes. Poirot turned to the constable. Take Mrs. Rice to the small sitting room. She will give a full statement. The Yard will want everything in writing. As Vanessa passed him, she paused. Tell me, monsieur, did you know? From the first moment, Poirot considered. From the smell of almonds, yes. From the thread, I was certain. From the mud, I simply enjoyed watching you perform. She smiled a real smile this time. Then, I almost won. Almost, echoed Poirot softly, is never. Enough. The door closed behind her. The rain kept falling. Chapter 4. The confession that lied. The constable led Vanessa Rice away, but Poirot did not follow. Instead, he returned to the center of the morning room, clasped his hands behind his back, and looked at the four remaining people with something close to pity. You are relieved, yes? The murderess has confessed. The case is closed. You may all go back to your lives. Yet the little gray cells, they are not relieved at all. They are furious. Charles gave a nervous laugh. What the devil do you mean? She just admitted it. Poirot shook his head slowly. She admitted a murder, not the murder. There is a difference. He walked to the window and stared out at the dripping gardens. Madame Rice is clever, very clever. She saw the net closing, and she did what any intelligent cornered animal does. She sacrificed a pawn to save the king. She believes by confessing she protects someone else in this room. Oh, she is wrong. Hercule Poirot does not accept gifts from murderers. Lady Haverford rose this time, her voice trembling with rage. This is monstrous. You have your killer. Leave us alone. Poirot turned his bright green eyes on her. If I leave now, madame, an innocent woman will hang, and a guilty one will inherit 20,000 a year. That I cannot allow. He reached into his pocket and drew out the 5 sheets of notepaper. They had written earlier. You remember these? The times you claimed to go to bed. Mrs. Rice wrote 11:55. That is correct. She was seen leaving the library then. But 2 other times are impossible. He laid 2 sheets on the table. Captain Blaine wrote 11:40. Yet the housemaid swears she brought Captain Blaine a hot water bottle at 11:52 and found him already in bed reading The Sporting Life. Miss Cleek wrote 12 sharp, yet the footman passed her on the upper landing at 11:48, carrying fresh flowers to her room because she could not sleep. Both times are lies. Blaine went very white. Diana Cleek pressed both hands to her mouth. Poirot continued gently. So we have 3 people who were moving about the house between 11:45 and 12 o'clock. Mrs. Rice, who confesses. Captain Blaine, who lies. Miss Cleek, who lies. And still the locked door, the bolted windows, the clock stopped at 11:58. 1 murder, but at least 2 murderers. He let that settle. Now we come to the trick itself. The famous locked room. Everyone believes it was done with string and ice and a music hall stunt. Mrs. Rice wishes us to believe it because she read about such a trick in a magazine last year. Convenient, Poirot walked to the fireplace again and lifted the poker. But ice leaves. Water? There was no water on the floor this morning, only 1 speck of mud. String leaves marks on the key. There were no marks. And the thread of silk I found was too short, too fragile to turn a heavy key from the outside. He replaced the poker and faced them. The door was never locked from the outside. It was never unlocked from the inside after the shot. The key was on the inside all the time because the murderer never left the room. Silence. Absolute silence. Poirot smiled. Sir Reginald was not alone when he died. Someone was hiding behind the tall bookcase beside the fireplace. After the shot, the murderer waited until the house was quiet again, then simply opened the door and walked out with the rest of you when the body was discovered. The door was locked. Only in your imaginations, because you never tried it until you broke it down together. Charles found his voice first. There is no space behind that bookcase. I played there as a child. Poirot shook his head. There is space exactly the width of a woman who has not eaten properly for weeks because she is terrified. Space for a woman wearing a dark coat over her nightdress. Space for Miss Diana Cleek. Diana made a small broken sound and folded in on herself like a paper doll. Poirot's voice softened. You loved him, didn't you? Even after he threw you away like a soiled glove. You went to beg one last time. He laughed at you. You saw the revolver on the desk, you picked it up, and you shot him. Then you hid. You waited while Mrs. Rice came and went. You waited while the clocks were tampered with. You waited until the door was broken down and you walked out with the others' tears already on your cheeks, because you had been crying for hours. Diana lifted her head. Her face was wet. Yes, she whispered. I killed him. Vanessa knew. She found me there covered in blood. She said she would take the blame because no one would hang a poor secretary. Only a rich adventuress with a motive from Egypt. She said it was kinder. Poirot looked at her for a long moment. Kinder to let you live with it every day of your life. No, mademoiselle, that is not kindness. That is cruelty dressed as mercy. He turned to the constable who had returned to the doorway. Take Miss Cleek to the sitting room also. Separate rooms, please. And someone bring her tea with much sugar. She is going to faint. As Diana was led away, sobbing. Captain Blaine stood up slowly. I helped her, he said quietly. I stopped the hall clock so the time would be confused. I told her where the spare key to the garden door was kept. I thought if it looked like suicide, no one would suffer more. Poirot nodded. You suffer now, my friend. That is the way of it. Blaine looked suddenly old. Will she hang? Poirot did not answer at once. Then he said in England, a woman has not hanged for 20 years. Perhaps mercy will be shown. Perhaps not. That is for the courts. He looked around the room one last time. The murder that was not supposed to be solved is solved twice. First, by a woman who tried to buy redemption with her own neck. Second, by the truth. He bowed slightly. And now Mies Amos. I think we have all had enough of death for one morning. Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin November sun broke through the clouds and touched the wet lawns with pale gold. Chapter 5. The third murderer Poirot did not leave Alderley Court that afternoon. He asked for a small fire in the library, a fresh pot of chocolate, and absolute silence. The house obeyed as though it too were exhausted from lying at 4 o'clock. The local inspector arrived with 2 sergeants from Scotland Yard. They found Poirot sitting in Sir Reginald's leather chair, feet barely touching the floor, turning the old Webley revolver over and over in his neat gloved hands. You have 2 confessions, he told them without looking up. Both are true. Neither is complete. There is a third person who has not spoken. The inspector opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot raised one finger. Listen, the bullet that killed Sir Reginald was fired from this revolver. Yet the serial number was filed off years ago. Why? Because this gun did not belong to Sir Reginald at all. It belonged to Captain Marcus Blaine. Look at the grip. The checkering is worn smooth on the left side, exactly where a left-handed man holds it. Captain Blaine is left-handed. Sir Reginald was not. He laid the revolver gently on the desk. Captain Blaine brought the gun tonight, intending to kill his old friend. If the money was refused again, he did not use it. Someone else did. The inspector frowned. "You are saying Blaine is the third murderer?" "No," said Poirot. "I am saying Blaine is the reason the murder happened at all." He rang the bell. The butler appeared. "Ask Captain Blaine to come, please." Alone. Minutes later, Blaine walked in, coat unbuttoned, face gray. He looked at the revolver and closed his eyes. "I thought it had been thrown in the river years ago," he said. "Reggie gave it back to me last night as a joke. Said I might need it one day to put myself out of misery. I left it on the desk when I stormed out." Poirot nodded, and Miss Cleek found it. "Later, when she came begging, she recognized it as yours. She knew if the police traced the gun to you, you would hang for a murder you did not commit. So she and Mrs. Rice built the impossible crime around your revolver to protect you." Blaine sank into a chair and covered his face. "I killed him just by being a fool," he muttered. "No," said Poirot quietly. "Sir Reginald killed himself long ago by being cruel. The rest was only the echo." He stood and walked to the French windows. The sun was setting red across the wet gardens. "There is one last thing. The suicide note. The ink was damp when I first saw it. The handwriting was perfect, but the pressure of the pen was too light. Someone traced Sir Reginald's writing with his own pen after he was dead. The forger used the blotter to steady the page. Look." He lifted the leather blotter and turned it over. On the underside, faint reversed letters showed clearly. "I can no longer live with what I have done. Mrs. Rice wrote the note weeks ago in Cairo. She brought it with her like a death warrant. When Diana shot Sir Reginald in panic, Vanessa saw her. Chance she pressed the dead man's fingers around the pen made him hold it while she guided the hand to sign. Then she wrote the message herself, using his signature as a pattern. That is why the ink was still damp. That is why the note smells faintly of bitter almonds. The same hand that held the poisoned glass held the pen." Blaine groaned. 3 people. To kill one monster. Poirot turned. 3 people to save each other from the rope. Love takes strange forms. Mon, Capitain. The inspector cleared his throat. "What happens now?" Poirot considered. "Miss Cleek will be charged with manslaughter. She is young, heartbroken, half mad with grief. No English jury will hang her. Mrs. Rice will be charged as accessory after the fact. She is rich, clever, and has no prior record. Transportation, perhaps, or a quiet prison for women. Captain Blaine will be charged with nothing. He only lent the weapon and stopped the clock. The law has no name for that crime." He looked at the revolver one last time, "and the gun will go back to its owner with a new lesson. Never give a loaded pass to someone who still loves you." He placed it in Blaine's trembling hand. "Take it, Captain. Throw it in the river yourself this time. Some ghosts need to drown twice." Blaine stood for a long moment, then walked out without a word. The door closed softly behind him. Poirot turned to the inspector. "The case is finished. There will be no scandal. The family will say Sir Reginald died of heart failure brought on by the storm. The 3 who know the truth will carry it to their graves. That is the English way." The inspector saluted awkwardly and left. Poirot remained. Alone in the growing dusk, he straightened the books on the desk, closed the French windows, and turned the key in the lock. One final time, then he spoke to the empty room in a voice no one would ever hear. "Justice Mies Amos is never perfect. Sometimes. It is only the least terrible choice." He walked out, switched off the light, and closed the library door forever. Chapter 6. The letter that arrived to late 2 days. Later, the inquest was held in the village hall and lasted exactly 19 minutes. The coroner read a brief statement from the family doctor. Sir Reginald Haverford had died of heart seizure following a sudden shock. Verdict: death by natural causes. The newspapers printed one paragraph on page 7 and moved on to the abdication crisis. Poirot took the morning train back to London. He sat alone in a first-class compartment, staring at the frost on the fields. Without seeing them, in his pocket lay a letter postmarked Cairo dated 3 weeks earlier. It had arrived at Alderley Court that morning, forwarded by the solicitors. The butler had pressed it into Poirot's hand as he left. He slit the envelope now with a small silver knife. The handwriting was firm, masculine, elegant. "My dear Haverford, by the time you read this, I will be dead by my own hand in the desert. You destroyed me 20 years ago, and I have carried the shame ever since. My sister Vanessa is coming to England. She does not know the full story. Tell her I forgave you long ago, so she need not stain her soul for a ghost. Yours in eternal silence, Philip." Reese Poirot folded the letter and slipped it back into his pocket. He closed his eyes, so that was the final piece. Philip Rice had killed himself before Vanessa even left Egypt. She had come to England, seeking vengeance for a brother already at peace. All the poison, all the careful plans, all the terror of the locked room had been built on a lie she never knew was a lie. He thought of Diana Cleek sitting in a police cell somewhere, clutching a cup of sweet tea with both hands like a child. He thought of Vanessa Rice staring at gray prison walls for the next 10 years because she believed she was avenging a murder that never needed avenging. He thought of Marcus Blaine walking to the river in the dark with a revolver that now weighed more than the world. The train rattled on toward London. Outside, the frost melted under weak winter sun. Poirot took out his little notebook and wrote 3 names. Beside each, he drew a tiny, perfect circle. Diana Vanessa Marcus. Then he drew a 4th circle and left it empty. Because somewhere there is always a 4th person. He murmured to the empty compartment. The one who started everything and never fired a shot. The dead man himself. He closed the notebook and looked out at the passing villages. Sir Reginald Haverford had ruined lives the way other men ruin shirts, carelessly and often. He had died quickly in a room full of books he never read. And in dying, he had finally won. 3 living souls would carry his poison forever while he lay clean under English soil. Poirot allowed himself one small sigh. "It is not often the victim is also the greatest criminal," he said softly. "But then the English aristocracy has always been good at that." At King's Cross, he stepped down onto the platform, straightened his hat, and walked into the crowd. No one noticed the small, neat man in the perfectly tailored overcoat. No one ever does until it is too late. Behind him, the train pulled out empty, and the smoke dissolved into the cold. London sky, to be continued. Chapter 7. The quiet after the storm with Techcroft Mansions was exactly as Poirot had left it 6 days earlier. The fire laid but unlit the air, faintly scented with verbena, and the silver on the sideboard gleaming like new moonlight. He removed his gloves, folded them once, placed them in the left drawer, then hung his overcoat with mathematical precision. Only when the door clicked shut did he allow his shoulders to drop a fraction. Hastings was waiting in the sitting room, holding 2 letters on a salver. "You look like a tired old chap," he began, then stopped. Poirot's face in the lamplight was the color of old parchment. "I am not tired, mon ami," replied Poirot. "I am merely disgusted with the human race. Sit. I will tell you what the newspapers will never print." He told the story from the beginning, speaking without pause, while Hastings listened in growing silence. When Poirot reached the letter from Philip Rice, Hastings put his pipe down and forgot to light it, so the brother had already taken his own life. Precisely. Vanessa traveled 3,000 miles to punish a man for a crime that no longer required punishment. Diana shot a man who had already destroyed himself with cruelty. Blaine lent the gun that killed the only friend he ever had. 3 people danced on a grave that was already occupied. Hastings stared into the fire. "And the law calls it justice." "The law calls it expediency," said Poirot. "The coroner is a cousin of Lady Haverford. The chief constable lunches every Thursday at the same club as Charles. England prefers a quiet lie to a noisy truth. Always has." He rose and went to the window. London lay under a thin November fog, the street lamps glowing like tired ghosts. "Yet something still troubles the little gray cells," he murmured. Something small and ridiculous and perfectly obvious. Hastings waited. Poirot turned. The revolver was filed smooth of its number years ago. Blaine said he thought it had been thrown in the river. Yet Sir Reginald produced it that last evening as a cruel joke. How did it come back into the house? Hastings shrugged. Servants, perhaps. Or Sir Reginald found it himself. No. Sir Reginald hated guns. He told everyone after the war that firearms were for peasants and Prussians. He would never keep one. Someone returned it to the house recently. Someone who knew it belonged to Blaine and knew exactly what it would be used for one day. He crossed to the telephone. "One moment, mon ami. I have been unforgivably slow." He asked for a trunk call, too. "All Durley Court." The butler answered on the 5th ring. "This is Hercule Poirot. Tell me quickly who cleaned the library the week before the shooting." The butler's voice trembled slightly. "That would be the new under-footman, Mr. Poirot, young Thomas. He started only 10 days ago. And where is young Thomas now?" "He left this morning, sir. Said his mother was taken ill. Lady Haverford gave him a week's wages and a railway ticket to York." Poirot thanked him and hung up. His eyes were bright again. Of course. The fourth murderer. The one who never entered the library at all. Hastings looked baffled. "You think a footman planned everything?" "I think a footman was paid to place an old revolver in a drawer where it would be found at the perfect moment. I think someone knew Diana was desperate, knew Vanessa was coming, knew Blaine was at the end of his rope. Someone lit the fuse and walked away. He opened his notebook and wrote a new name. Beneath the 3 perfect circles, Charles Haverford the heir," said Hastings slowly. "But he inherits anyway. He inherits 20,000 a year and freedom from a stepfather, who threatened to disinherit him yesterday. He inherits a mother who will never remarry and a house with no more scandals. He inherits everything provided 3 other people destroy themselves instead of him." Poirot closed the notebook. Charles shouted at his stepfather in front of witnesses. Charles made certain everyone heard the threat of disinheritance. Charles. "Stop the clock, only Blaine claims that." Charles was the first to suggest suicide, and Charles paid a footman to disappear the moment the inquest was over. Hastings whistled softly. "Can you prove it?" "Proof? No. The footman is gone. The revolver is at the bottom of the river. The confessions are signed. England has its quiet lie. But Hercule Poirot knows." He poured 2 small glasses of tisane, handed one to Hastings, and raised his own to "the crimes that are never punished, mon ami. They are the only ones that really matter." They drank. The fire settled into comfortable embers outside. The fog thickened, and London forgot all Durley Court as completely as it forgets everything that refuses to bleed in public. Chapter 8. The Man Who Never Fired a Shot 3 weeks later. London had turned raw and wet with the kind of cold that crawls under collars and stays there. Hercule Poirot sat alone in his flat writing letters in his neat, upright hand. The fire crackled. The clock ticked, and the case of Alderley Court was officially buried beneath layers of English. Silence. Yet silence is never complete when Poirot is listening. At 10:30, the telephone rang. The operator sounded apologetic. "A trunk call from York. A young man wishing to speak to Monsieur Poirot urgently. Put him through," said Poirot. A nervous Yorkshire voice crackled down the line. Mr. Poirot, sir. This is Thomas Ellis, late of Alderley Court, the under-footman. I need to talk to you before I leave the country. Poirot's grip tightened on the receiver. Speak, mon garçon. I am listening. Thomas spoke quickly, as though afraid the words would burn him. Mr. Charles paid me £50 to find Captain Blaine's old revolver and put it in the top drawer of the library desk. Said it was a joke on the captain. Said, sir. Reginald wanted to give it back dramatic-like. I thought nothing of it till I read about the death. Then I knew. I swear I never meant anyone to get shot. Poirot's voice was very gentle. Where are you now? York Station. Got a boat train to Liverpool. At noon, Mr. Charles gave me another 100 to vanish. I took the money, but I can't sleep, sir. I keep seeing that poor girl's face in the papers. Send the boy to me, said Poirot calmly. Whitecroft Mansions apartment 203. Tell him he will be safe. He hung up, and Scotland. Yard spoke for 3 minutes to Chief Inspector Japp, then sat back. And waited. Thomas arrived an hour later, soaked in a shaking hat in hand. Poirot gave him hot coffee, a towel, and a chair by the fire. Japp arrived 20 minutes after that, bringing a sergeant and a promise of protection. Thomas told everything again, this time on paper, signed and witnessed. The £50 were the exact words Charles had used, the date he had placed the revolver. The second payment delivered in a plain envelope at the village post office. When he finished, he looked 10 years older and strangely lighter. Japp folded the statement carefully. Enough to arrest Charles Haverford for conspiracy to murder. More than enough, replied Poirot. But we will not arrest him today. Japp stared. Why the devil not? Because, said Poirot, the real punishment is already eating him alive. He walked to the window and looked down at the street where a taxi idled. Watch. At that moment, Charles Haverford stepped out of the taxi coat collar, turned up eyes, scanning the building like a hunted animal. He had lost weight. His face was gray. The arrogant tilt of the head was gone. He came to by my silence, said Poirot softly. He traced the call to York and discovered Thomas had not boarded the boat and panicked. He brings money, perhaps a threat. Instead, he will find Chief Inspector Japp and a warrant. Charles entered the building. The lift creaked upward. Footsteps approached along the corridor. Poirot opened the door before the knock came. Charles stood there, envelope bulging in his hand, mouth working soundlessly when he saw Japp behind Poirot's shoulder. You said no one would ever know, Charles whispered. I said nothing of the kind, replied Poirot. You assumed England would protect you because it always has. Today it protects a frightened footman instead. Charles looked suddenly very young. I only wanted him gone, he said. I never meant Diana to shoot him. I never thought she would, but you made certain the gun was there when her heart was breaking. You made certain Vanessa believed vengeance was required. You made certain Blaine would be blamed if anything went wrong. You murdered with the cleanest hands of all. Charles dropped the envelope. Banknotes scattered across the carpet like dirty snow. Japp stepped forward, cuffs ready. Charles Haverford, I am arresting you for conspiracy to commit murder and perverting the course of justice. Charles did not resist. He looked once at Poirot, almost pleading. Will they hang me? Poirot regarded him for a long moment. No, he said at last. They will send you to prison for 15 years, perhaps 20. And every day you will remember that you turned love into murder, without ever pulling a trigger. That is worse than hanging. They led him away. The door closed. The flat was quiet again, except for the soft hiss of the fire. Thomas Ellis began to cry silently, tears of pure relief. Poirot placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You have done a brave thing. You will testify, you will be safe, and one day you will sleep again. Later, when Japp telephoned to say Charles had confessed everything in the car on the way to the station, Poirot only nodded. It is finished, he he said, and hung up. He returned to his chair, poured a fresh tisane, and raised the cup toward the empty room. To the fourth murderer, he murmured. The one who almost escaped. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a week. December's sun touched the wet roofs of London for the first time in weeks. Chapter 9. The Price of Knowing Spring. Came early to London in 1938. The chestnut trees along the embankment burst into pale candles almost overnight, and the Thames looked almost clean under a mild sky. Hercule Poirot walked slowly, enjoying the sun on his face and the absence of any urgent telephone calls. The Alderley court case had vanished from the newspapers as completely as if it had never happened. Charles Haverford had been tried in camera, sentenced to 18 years, and shipped quietly to Dartmoor. Diana Cleek had been bound over for manslaughter, released into the care of a convent in Belgium. Vanessa Rice received 12 years but was already teaching French to the other prisoners, and rumor said she would be out in 7. Only Marcus Blaine still walked free, though the last Poirot heard he had sold his medals and taken a boat to Canada with nothing but the clothes on his back. Poirot had closed the file. Or so he believed. On a bright April morning, a letter arrived written on heavy cream paper with a crest he recognized at once. Alderley Court. The handwriting was Lady Haverford's, thin, spidery, elegant. Monsieur Poirot, I will not thank you for what you did. My son rots in prison. My house is half empty, and the village crosses the street when I pass. Yet I find I must write. Yesterday, the solicitors read Sir Reginald's true will, the one he lodged in London the day before he died. He left everything to a home for fallen women in Whitechapel. The estate, the house, the investments, all of it. Charles gets nothing. I am allowed to live here until I die, and then the doors close forever. He knew. He always knew someone would kill him, and he arranged the final joke from beyond the grave. You were right. The dead man won, after all. Poirot read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the small cedar box where he kept things that refused to stay buried. He sat for a long time watching the sunlight move across the carpet. George. His valet brought coffee and the Morning Post. Anything important, sir? Only the truth, mon ami, replied Poirot. It arrives late, but it always arrives. That afternoon, he took a taxi to Scotland Yard. Jap met him in the corridor, smelling of tobacco and wet wool. Thought you'd want to know, he said, without greeting. Charles Haverford tried to hang himself. In his cell last night, sheet round the bars. The warder cut him down in time. He's alive, but he won't speak now. Just stare at the wall. Poirot nodded once. He has finally understood the sentence. 18 years was never the punishment. Silence is. They walked together to the yard, where the first roses were pushing through the soot. You ever think we did the right thing? Jap asked suddenly. Every day, Poirot answered. And every day the answer changes. They stood without speaking, while a constable fed pigeons from his pocket. Later, Poirot walked home alone past bookshops and flower stalls. Children chased hoops along the pavement, and a barrel organ played something wistful from the war. He bought a small bunch of violets from an old woman who called him darling and pinned them to his lapel. At Whitecroft Mansions, he found Hastings waiting with tea already poured. I saw the papers about Charles, he began. Do not speak of it, said Poirot gently. Some stories end better when they are simply over. He drank his tea, looked at the violets, and then at the perfect order of his room. Order and method, he murmured. Yet the heart refuses to be tidy. Hastings watched him with sudden understanding. You miss them, don't you? All of them. Even the guilty ones. Poirot considered this. Then he smiled. The small private smile he saved for truths too large to share. I missed the moment before everything went wrong, T said. That is the only moment worth missing. He straightened a picture that did not need straightening. and opened the window to let in the spring air. Somewhere far away, a house was already beginning to decay, and 4 lives were scattered like leaves. After a storm, but here in the quiet London flat, the fire burned steadily. The clock ticked, and Hercule Poirot allowed himself one perfect afternoon in which no one needed saving and no one lied. Outside, the violets kept their small, brave color against the dark cloth of his coat. Chapter 10. The Murder That Was Never Won Murdered Rodham, 1939. London is sandbagged and nervous. But Whitecroft Mansions is still warm, still perfectly symmetrical. Hercule Poirot sits alone at his walnut desk, a single lamp burning, a small cedar box open in front of him. Inside lie 4 objects, a thread of pale blue silka, single muddy pearl, a torn corner of Egyptian papyra, dried violet from the spring of 1938. He arranges them in a neat row, then places a 5th item in the center, a plain white card on which he has written, in his own small, perfect hand, the single word that explains everything. Ariga reti. He leans back and speaks aloud to the empty room, because tonight the story must finally be told whole, without masks, without English silence. Yes, Mies, Amos, regret. That was the only murderer from the very first heartbeat. Sir Reginald Haverford did not die because of money, or revenge, or a broken heart. He died because he looked into the eyes of 4 people who still loved him in different ways, and he realized, too late, that he had taught them all to hate. The gun, the poison, the locked room. Those were only the stage props. The real bullet was fired 20 years earlier in a Cairo hotel when he laughed at a young man's honor and walked away. Philip Rice killed himself in the desert, yes, but he left a letter forgiving the man who ruined him. That letter reached Alderley Court the morning after the shooting. Vanessa never saw it. Charles burned it in the library grate before breakfast. That is why only a corner survived with this scarab watermark. Charles did not plan murder. He planned humiliation. He paid the footman to return Blaine's old revolver so that his stepfather could wave it at dinner and call Blaine a bankrupt coward one final time. Charles believed the worst that would happen was another drunken row. He never imagined Diana would pick the gun up with shaking hands and pull the trigger to make the laughter stop. Vanessa arrived ready to poison a monster and found a corpse already waiting. She saw Diana covered in blood and understood everything. In one glance, she chose to become the perfect suspect because she believed her brother's death still demanded payment. She forged the suicide note, planted the cyanide smell, staged the locked room with ice and thread, and confessed. All to give Diana a chance to live. Blaine stopped the hall clock because he thought he was protecting the woman he secretly loved. Diana shot the man because she still loved him too. Charles paid the footman because he wanted his stepfather shamed, not dead. Lady Haverford said nothing because she had prayed for years that someone would free her. Every single person in that house acted out of love, twisted into something unrecognizable. And every single one of them believed they were the only guilty. Soul, that is the truth the courts never heard. That is the truth Poirot carried alone for 2 years. He closes the cedar box, locks it, and slips the key into his waistcoat pocket. Outside, the first air raid siren of the war begins its long rising. Well, London holds its breath. Poirot stands at the window watching searchlights stab the dark dot. In a moment, George will come with the blackout curtains and the flat will become a small, safe island. But tonight, Poirot does not move. He speaks once more to the night, softly. In French. Pardonnez-nous, Reginald. Pardons news to us. Then he draws the curtains himself, turns off the lamp, and the room falls into perfect darkness. The murder that was never supposed to be solved is finally, completely, mercifully over. End of story. If this tale of locked rooms and broken hearts keeps you on the edge of your seat, do me one last favor. Hit that like button, drop your favorite moment in the comments, and subscribe so we can unravel the next impossible crime together. Your support means the world. Thank you for staying until the final curtain. Good night, Mies, Amos. The little gray cells are going to sleep.